In my last video, I tried really hard to avoid making a bead roller, but then I came to terms with the fact that I really need one to move forward on rebuilding my Jeep. Fortunately, I had set aside part of the original rusted out frame for the Jeep just for this purpose. Well, it took just about every weapon in the arsenal, but I got these pretty well cleaned up. Now I need to clean everything else up. While I do enjoy making things like this out of scrap and junk, sometimes it feels like a lot of extra effort and a lot of extra mess. So I was thinking that this part and this part were parallel, but now that I've cut it apart, it's obvious that they aren't. So putting it together this way, I don't think it's going to be the best bet. Maybe something more like that. Shoot for like a 24-inch depth, 60 centimeters. Okay, so after a lot of fit up, couple of tries on that piece, I think I'm pretty happy with how this is looking. I left these tabs on here so that I can This line is giving me a reference halfway between the two legs. You know, I've got a wrench that I made specifically for this collet chuck, and despite the fact that it's the only thing it fits, I guess the shop gnomes like to hide it on me a lot. This was a really terrible setup in terms of rigidity, so there was a lot of stepping up drill bits in small increments, and I really have no illusion that these holes went straight through. But they'll be close enough. I've got some bronze bushings to pop in there. They're a little bit of a loose fit, but when I do final assembly, I'll use some Loctite to help hold those in. This is just a 7/8 cold rolled steel rod. I'll polish this up later where it's running on the bearings. This should be 2 7/8. It's actually a little under that. 2.865. It's right about it there. Now I need two 2-inch gears. I'm hoping there's something in my drawer of random gears that will work. And when I say 2-inch gear, I of course mean a 2-inch pitch circle diameter. Ah, there we go. Got my gear blank set up on a mandrel in the dividing head. All dialed in, got some set screws in there. I don't have a real gear cutter for this, but I've got the cutter that I ground for doing the back gear repair on my lathe. I'll leave a card right there for that video if you want to see how I did this. And I just made a little fly cutter sort of holder for it. Should work as long as I do light cuts, and it'll just take a while. I should note that I have no reason for doing this other than I have the tools to do it, and gears are kind of expensive. This is working, it's just going very slowly. Let's see if we can move this along a little quicker and save some wear on this tool. 5 full turns on the dividing head is 1/8 of a turn on the spindle, so it's taking the gap that was at the top and moving it 45 degrees. There's obviously some pretty complicated math in figuring out how deep and where to go with a 90-degree cutter in an involute shape, so I just drew it up in CAD and let the computer tell me. Now I'm going to do the same thing again with the slitting saw. Well, I definitely made some mistakes there and made some pretty ugly gears, but they should still work for what I need. I've got this little old gearhead motor that I want to use for this. It's 9.6 RPMs, so should be a little on the slow side, but I'd rather have this running slow than too fast. I was hoping I could use a little offcut gear, but I need something a little bigger. So the Jeremy that does things off camera will take care of that while I clean this up a little bit. This bearing was super sticky with old dried out grease, so I cleaned it out as best I could and repacked it. Somewhat predictably, it did peel the paint off of these things. I picked up this dual foot pedal switch off of eBay. For 30 bucks, it actually seems pretty high quality. It's all cast. What I did was I wired in the normally closed contact here to feed power to this pedal. So if you push both pedals at the same time, it only activates this one. This one also trips this relay, which swaps the start windings. So one pedal goes one direction, and one pedal goes the other. Oh, and it looks like the other Jeremy finished up that gear. Of course, he probably should have made that gear a little bit bigger, but I'm not real concerned about the backlash on this. A little more deburring of some of the gear teeth and we're rolling. The only problem I see with this is I'm not entirely convinced this motor is strong enough to use it the way I have it set up right now. I think I need to rethink this and get back to you. I made a little hub for that offcut piece. So now I should be gaining torque instead of losing it. I still have no idea if this is going to be strong enough, but we're going to find out. I did go back later and add in some tapered aluminum shims here. I kind of tilted it in. It gets those gears meshing a lot better. I don't know where else in the video to mention it, so I figured I'd mention it now. So I'm realizing with the bushing here, I don't actually need this one. It's just kind of over-constraining things. Once I start welding Loctite on that one, it'll come loose. The block in the end here is a little bit trickier because this one needs to adjust up and down. Not sure exactly how that's going to work, but pretty sure it starts out the same way. Well, it's been a while since I've done that. If you're wondering why these holes are off-centered, it's because I screwed it up. That screw's a lot longer than I need. I found a shorter one. That existing hole is not in a bad place front to back. It probably just needs to come up a little bit. Rounded off this corner as well so it'll fit up in there. One more little block here with some rounded corners. That'll serve as the backstop for the movable piece. I think I'm ready to weld this. You remember that heavy steel plate that I had to cut out from over the wheel wells in the Jeep? Well, it's back. I guess it's pretty predictable once those bolts get welded in, they kind of bind up in the holes. Obviously I need a handle for the top of this. This one's been kicking around my scrap bin for quite a while. Let's get these shafts finished up. These shafts are a little too big to fit through the spindle on my lathe, and they're a little too long for the bed, so it's a good opportunity to get out the steady rest. It seems that the industry standard for the commercial dies for this is 22 millimeters, which is 866 thousandths. This is 7/8, so 875 thousandths. Since I want this to be concentric and I'm not taking a whole lot off, I've got it in the 4-jaw chuck dialed in to within about 1/2 thousandth. And at this point I realized I should dial it in off the bearing surface rather than off the end of the shaft. It's not real straight. The second shaft gets the same treatment, and that pretty much wraps up the bead roller. Now I need some dies for it. I'm roughing out these dies out of kind of whatever chunks of old shaft I have. I'd like to heat treat these things, but so that I'm not fighting scale formation on them and surface roughness from that, I'm going to pre-harden these and then temper them back to maybe something in the mid-30 Rockwell hardness. Since I obviously don't know what this stuff is, there's some guesswork involved. I heat treated these at 850C and now I'm tempering them at 400C. If you're wondering why I'm using Celsius instead of Fahrenheit, it's because this controller only goes up to 999 degrees. It doesn't matter what the units are, it just only goes up to 999. So in order to get it hot enough, I have to run it in Celsius. I struggled a bit to get a profile that looked right, so eventually I cut out a piece of the old floor and used that as a template, and got something that I feel like is close enough. So obviously we've got the dies I need for this project, kind of matched set there. The problem is when you use these, it pulls material in, warps the panel a little bit. The solution to that is this set, which is a stretching die set. This one's just straight. This one has a little bit of crown to it. It's sort of like a mini English wheel. It just kind of pre-stretches the material so there's material to form that bead rather than pulling it from the surrounding panel. Since I have this flat one, I also made a tipping die. That's for making flanges. I don't really need that right now, but I figured since I had that, I might as well make it. I think I can also use these two together if I really wanted to. Anyway, let's make some Jeep parts. I did 10 passes on that. I don't know how well you can see it, but I can definitely feel that there's a little bit of shape to that now, which means this is stretched out. So let's put a bead on it. The motor on this isn't quite strong enough to do it all in one pass, so I'm taking multiple passes. So obviously we've got a horribly warped panel now. Part of that is the ends of these aren't closed. The bead just kind of fades back into the flat metal, so we need to close that up. For that we need another tool. This random piece of shaft already has a hole down the middle, so it's a pretty good start. You can also make these out of a gasket hole punch, but I don't have one of those handy, so I'll use this. There's obviously a learning curve here, and I'm going to try to rework that one on the bead roller a little bit. Alright, change of approach here. I made a little adapter for this, put it in my arbor press. That's much more controllable. It definitely took some, but not all of the warpage out. We'll see if putting the flanges on helps. There's definitely some extra material in here. Kind of playing around with clamping it up to the side pieces, and when I do that and try to flatten it out, I can see it bulges up here. I think a little work with the stretcher and it might straighten out a bit. I played around with both the shrinker and the stretcher for a while and really got nowhere with it. I think the ultimate solution is when I put this all together, just basically torture this into the shape I want it to be. Speaking of which, I realized the flange on the side panels is a little too far over. I need to rebend it so I can mix and match dies to get something that'll flatten the old one out. I've got to say, this thing's starting to make me want to have an English wheel, which I definitely don't need for the Jeep. It's pretty tempting for me to start sticking this stuff together, but I think it makes more sense to wait until I have everything ready to go on the Jeep and kind of do it one piece at a time. On this panel, I'm going to be much more aggressive with the pre-stretching. Alright, so obviously we have a bit of a hoop to it. If I use this bead roller die and push it down like I did the last time, it's just going to make that worse. So let's try doing it from the other side this time. Well, despite my best effort, that still came out pretty warped and terrible. Since the beads pull material in, I ran the shrinker around the outside to try to get rid of some of the extra material. It made it a little bit better, but it's not great. I also ended up with a bunch of track marks from the dies, and look guys, if you want to see really good bead rolling, you shouldn't expect it from the guy that just built a bead roller out of garbage. There's a good bit of skill and art to this that I obviously don't have yet, but sort of the purpose of this project is to develop that skill. But anyway, I've got a few more pieces of the puzzle to make before I put this all back together, so I think I'm going to leave dealing with this mess for another video. So on that, we'll wrap this video up. I am really happy with how this thing came out. I love the post-apocalyptic rust punk aesthetic of it. It got me through the parts I needed to make for this project. A couple of tweaks I could see making in the future. This motor's a little underpowered for what I'm asking of it. It would be nice to be able to do things in one pass, or fewer passes at least. And having speed control for doing things like the pre-stretching, make that go a little faster, would be nice. I could definitely see swapping this out, but it got me through this one. I could also see adding some sort of fence here to keep the beads straight, and maybe add a table to support it. Hopefully avoid some of those track marks a little bit. And of course, make some more dies. As always, thanks for watching, and a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Those guys get regular weekly updates on projects like this. So if you like what you're seeing, consider supporting me there and stick around.